What happens when the youngest among us face the harshest punishment of all? The justice system claims to be fair, yet history is filled with chilling cases where children were sentenced to die before they even had a chance to truly live. Were these sentences justified, or were they victims of a broken system? Stay with us as we reveal the shocking stories of the youngest individuals ever condemned to the ultimate punishment in U.S. history. This is Hannah Oakwish. She was just 12 years old when her life was cut short in 18th century Connecticut. But what could a child have done to deserve such a fate? She was born in 1774 and was of mixed Native American and African American descent. From the start, life was cruel to her. Described as having an intellectual disability, she was shuffled between foster homes, never finding stability, never knowing the care every child deserves. Then came the fateful summer of 1786. A petty disagreement over something as innocent as stolen strawberries set off a chilling chain of events. 6-year-old Eunice Bolas accused Hannah of taking the fruit, a small dispute that should have ended there, but it didn't. It became something far worse. On July 21, 1786, a horrifying discovery was made. Young Eunice was found lifeless near her home in New London, Connecticut. The town was gripped with fear, and the hunt for answers began. Suspicion fell on Hannah, the last one known to have quarreled with Eunice. Under pressure, Hannah denied everything. Was this out of guilt or out of fear? She even claimed 4 boys were responsible. But then, as she was taken to the Bolas residence, to the very place where Eunice's small body lay cold and still, her resolve broke. She reportedly confessed. Hannah admitted to luring Eunice away with the promise of a hidden treasure. But instead of finding riches, Eunice walked toward her doom. Despite her young age and cognitive challenges, mercy was nowhere to be found. Hannah was tried as an adult, her childhood stripped away in the eyes of the law. The verdict was reached fast. Guilty. The punishment: she lost her life. On December 20th, 1786, a massive crowd gathered to witness the final, haunting moments of a child. Reports describe Hannah as trembling, her wide eyes filled with terror, silently pleading for mercy that would never come. At just 12 years and 9 months old, she became one of the youngest individuals to face the ultimate punishment in America. But can the justice system repeat the same mistake a century later? The next case will shock you even more. This is James Arsene, a boy whose fate was sealed long before he even understood the weight of his actions. Born in 1862 in the Cherokee Nation, he grew up in a world where survival was uncertain and justice was anything but fair. Like many Native children of his time, he faced struggles beyond his control. But what led him down a path that would end in the most extreme punishment? On a cold, unforgiving November day in 1872, near Tahlequah, the heart of the Cherokee Nation, a Swedish immigrant named Henry Feigl set out on a journey toward Fort Gibson. He had no idea that this trip would be his last. Along the way, he crossed paths with a boy, just 10 years old, James Arsene, and his older accomplice, William Parchmeal. What started as an encounter quickly turned into a desperate act of theft. In the struggle, Feigl was fatally wounded. The young criminals took his boots and the little money he had, just 25 cents, before vanishing into the wilderness. Was a child's life really worth that? For over a decade, the case remained buried in the past. The law did not catch up with them. Did anyone even remember? Had justice forgotten? It wasn't until 1885, 13 years later, that the past finally caught up with James Arsene. By then, he was no longer a child but a man of about 23. The delay between the event and their capture was due to the vast, lawless territories of the time where fugitives could vanish without a trace. In February 1885, both men were finally tried for the 1872 theft and fatal assault. Despite the fact that Arsene was just a child at the time of the unlawful act, the court showed no mercy. On June 18, 1885, James Arsene and William Parchmeal faced the ultimate penalty at Fort Smith, Arkansas. Arsene's sentence was carried out 13 years after the event that started it all as a child, highlights the complexities and, at times, the inefficiencies of the justice system during that era. In the 20th century, the world had evolved into a much better place, but racism toward Africans still existed. If you thought this was an injustice, wait until you hear how a 14-year-old was put on trial. On March 23, 1944, in the quiet town of Alcolu, South Carolina, a discovery sent shockwaves through the community. Two young girls, 11-year-old Betty June Binnicker and 8-year-old Mary Emma Thames, were found lifeless in a ditch. Their brutal fate demanded justice, but what followed was anything but just. Later, that same day, without hesitation, without evidence, 14-year-old George Stinney Jr., an African-American boy, was taken into custody. But why him? Was there any proof? Or was he simply the easiest target? According to official records, George Stinney Jr. allegedly confessed, but there was no transcript, no written statement, no lawyer present, and no parents by his side. The questioning took place behind closed doors, and when it was over, the authorities claimed he had admitted. But did he? His trial took place on April 24, 1944, just 1 month after the event. There was no time for investigation, no chance for a real defense. The entire process, from jury selection to sentencing, lasted less than a single day. How could a child's life be decided so quickly? His defense team didn't call a single witness. They didn't present any evidence. They barely spoke. On that fateful day, he was led to the chamber where his sentence was carried out. His wrists were too small for the straps. The chair? Too big. When the switch was pulled, the mask meant to cover his face slipped. The horror was exposed for all to see. His final words? A quiet, trembling, "No, sir." 70 years later, in December 2014, the truth finally began to surface. After years of debate, a South Carolina judge overturned George Stinney Jr.'s conviction. The ruling was clear. He had never received a fair trial. His so-called confession? Likely forced. But justice had come too late. In 2005, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in the case of Roper v. Simmons that minors could no longer receive the harshest legal sentence. But could this step prevent another tragedy in human history? This is Reuben Cantu, a name tied to a case filled with controversy, unanswered questions, and a decision that could never be undone. It all began in November 1984 in San Antonio, Texas. That night, Cantu and his friend David Garza decided to rob a house still under construction. It seemed like a reckless but simple act. But by the time the night was over, one man had lost his life, another had barely survived, and Cantu's future was set on a path with no return. Pedro Gomez did not survive the incident. Juan Moreno did. After the incident, the two teenagers ran off. At first, Moreno couldn't identify Cantu as one of the attackers. He wasn't sure. The events had been chaotic and fear clouded his mind. But later, his story changed. He identified Cantu as one of the suspects. But why? Did he suddenly remember something new? With a single testimony, Cantu's fate was sealed. He was found guilty and sentenced to the ultimate punishment. But as the years passed, doubt began to grow. Was the case against him really solid? Even Sam Millsap, the district attorney who had prosecuted him, later admitted to having serious doubts. He questioned whether Cantu had been wrongfully convicted, but by then it was too late. The system had already decided his fate. The day before his sentence was carried out, Reuben Cantu was given the option to choose a final meal. His request? Chewing gum. But even that was denied. In the early hours of August 24, 1993, at 12:22 a.m., Cantu's sentence was carried out through an injection. He was 26 years old at the time, making him the fifth person in Texas to face this outcome for an offense committed as a minor. Before the procedure, Cantu was given the chance to say his final words. His response? A quiet, steady, "No, sir." 7 minutes later, at 12:29 a.m., it was over. But the story became even more unsettling. Years later, Moreno and Garza took back their original statements. They admitted Ruben Cantu was not the person responsible. Moreno even described the real attacker as having very curly hair, something that didn't match Cantu at all. Despite this shocking revelation, the case was never reopened. The truth was never officially acknowledged. Then, in 2007, Judge Reed released a report reaffirming that Cantu had been responsible. But could this conclusion be trusted? After all, Reed was the same judge who had denied Cantu's appeal in 1988 and scheduled his sentencing in 1993. Was he truly looking at the evidence, or just trying to justify a decision that could never be reversed? Now meet Douglas Christopher Thomas, just what seemed to be a teenager in love. At 17 years old, Thomas was in a relationship with 14-year-old Jessica Wiseman, but not everyone approved. Jessica's parents, Kathy and James B. Wiseman, saw trouble ahead. They urged their daughter to end things, but young love doesn't always listen. Jessica was determined to be with Thomas. That night, overwhelmed with emotions, the two came up with a drastic plan. Thomas showed up at the Wiseman house carrying a shotgun. Jessica, wanting to help her boyfriend, led him there and did everything she could to assist him in getting inside through a window. Thomas first fired at James, who didn't survive. Kathy was badly hurt but still hanging on. That's when Jessica, without hesitation, looked at Thomas and told him to finish what they had started. And he did. After his arrest, Thomas admitted to what happened. During the trial, the judges decided that the most severe punishment was appropriate. His defense team fought to have the trial moved, arguing that media coverage had already shaped public opinion. But the request was denied. The verdict stood. Jessica Wiseman, who was seen as being involved in the incident, was tried as a minor. Her sentence? Just 7 years. At 21, she was free. On January 9, 2000, the night before his sentence was carried out, Thomas was given a final meal. He chose fried chicken. There were no official last words recorded, but in a news interview a few days earlier, he shared his final thoughts. It's hard to accept that Jessica only served 7 years and now gets to live a normal life, while I'm just days away from facing the consequences for something we were both involved in. I made the wrong choices, so I can't blame anyone but myself. But I don't think young offenders should face this kind of punishment. It sends the message that there's no chance for change or rehabilitation. Was justice truly served? Or did one person pay the ultimate price while the other walked free? On July 2, 1977, 17-year-old Dalton Prejean and his 3 friends had been out drinking at several bars when they got into their 1966 Chevrolet and started driving through Lafayette Parish. It was supposed to be just another night out. But one broken taillight changed everything. State Police Officer Donald Cleveland pulled them over. Things quickly escalated after an argument broke out between Dalton's brother Joseph and the officer. Feeling angry about how the situation was unfolding, Dalton pulled out a .38 caliber revolver and fired at Officer Cleveland, hitting him twice. The officer didn't survive. Prejean and his friends took off, but authorities caught up with them just a few hours later. The trial was swift. Dalton Prejean was found guilty. The jury saw no room for leniency, not even for a 17-year-old with a low IQ and a history of mental health struggles. After years of legal battles, including an appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court in 1990, his sentence remained unchanged. On April 17, 1990, just a day before facing the consequences of his actions, he was given the option to choose his final meal. Prejean asked for a seafood platter and an orange soda. On May 18, 1990, Dalton Prejean faced the electric chair at Louisiana State Penitentiary in Angola. During the procedure, 24 family members of Officer Cleveland watched from the witness room. When asked for his last words, he said, "Nothing will be accomplished. I am at peace with myself. I would like to thank everyone who has supported me through all these years. I would also like to thank my loved ones for being strong. My son will be a better person by not letting something like this ruin his life. Stay strong, keep fighting, keep praying. They said it wasn't about revenge, but it's hard for me to see it, to understand it. I hope they find happiness. So I give up my life. I send my love to everyone. God bless you all. At 9:14 p.m., Dalton Prejean's life came to an end. But how can a simple act of theft lead to the loss of several lives? The next case is a shocking example. This is 17 years old Charles Rumbaugh. On April 4, 1975, he was involved in a theft at a jewelry store in Amarillo, where the store's owner, 58-year-old Michael Farlow, lost his life. Just days before that, Rumbaugh had also held up a motel in San Angelo, getting away with $350. Even as a kid, he had a pattern of getting into trouble with the law. Rumbaugh was taken into custody and faced serious charges. In April 1976, he went to trial, and the jury decided on the harshest punishment. While serving time, he managed to escape from the Potter County Jail along with 2 other inmates in December 1975, but authorities caught up with him not long after. On September 10, 1985, he was given the option of a last meal. He declined. The next day, September 11, 1985, Charles Rumbaugh faced his final moments in Texas. His last words? DJ, Lori, Dr. Wheat. All I can say is goodbye, and to the rest of you, although you may not forgive my mistakes, I forgive yours against me. I am ready to begin my journey, and that is all I have to say. On August 1, 1990, a customer walked into Wilkins Dry Cleaners in Conroe, Texas, expecting business as usual. Instead, they stumbled upon a horrifying scene. Employee Leda Wilkerson lay motionless on the floor. Nearby, a stack of jeans caught the eye, with the name McGinnis written on the pockets. Was this a simple theft gone wrong, or was there something more sinister at play? The very next day, authorities tracked down McGinnis at his aunt's house, just a short distance from the dry cleaners. He had only $15 on him, but what truly raised alarms was the .25 caliber pistol in his possession. Ballistics testing would later link the weapon to the unsettling events at Wilkins Dry Cleaners. By October 8, 1990, McGinnis was officially charged in connection with Leda Wilkerson's fate during the theft. What followed was a legal battle that ended on July 30, 1992, with the most severe punishment the law allowed. His appeal in 1994 was swiftly rejected, sealing his fate. Then, on January 25, 2000, McGinnis reached the final stage of his sentence in the state of Texas. In his last moments, he made no final statement, no request for a last meal, only silence. A stark contrast to the next case, where the individual had plenty to say. This is Toronto Patterson. In June 1995, at just 17 years old, he arrived at his great-aunt's house with one goal in mind: getting a BMW. Kimberly Brewer welcomed him inside, unaware of what was about to unfold. But when Patterson returned later, he wasn't empty-handed. He was carrying a .38 caliber revolver. What happened next would change lives forever. In the living room, a single moment of chaos erupted. Kimberly was caught in the gunfire, but she wasn't the only one there. Ollie, just 3 years old, and Jennifer, only 6, were also in the room. The unthinkable happened as both children were caught in the crossfire. Afterward, Patterson calmly removed 3 wheels from the BMW, loaded them into his grandmother's car, and drove away. He later attempted to sell them but found no buyers. That very day, police tracked him down. When they noticed small stains on his clothes, they pressed him for answers. At first, Patterson insisted he had nothing to do with it, but soon his story began to unravel. He was taken to court, where his age didn't spare him from facing one of the most severe punishments possible. On November the 20th, 1995, the verdict was set, sealing his fate. The day before everything was set to unfold, Patterson ordered his final meal, a meal that some say revealed more than just his last cravings. 6 pieces of crispy fried chicken, 4 jalapenos, 4 buttermilk biscuits with butter, a chef's salad with bacon bits, black olives, ham, and Italian dressing. To drink, 6 Sprites. And for dessert, a white cake with white icing. Then, on August 28, 2002, at the Walls Unit in Huntsville, Texas, Patterson faced his final moments. Before everything happened, he shared his last words. "I'm sorry for the pain. I'm sorry for what I caused my friends, family, and loved ones. I feel a great responsibility and guilt for what happened. I deserve to face the consequences, but I don't believe I should lose my life for something I didn't do." At 6:17 p.m., it was all over. But the next 17-year-old did something way more shocking. In 1981, Johnny Frank Garrett lived near a convent where 76-year-old Sister Tadia Benz resided. On the morning of October 31st, he entered the convent and physically assaulted Sister Tadia. Tragically, she wouldn't survive. How did this tragic event unfold? On November 9th, 1981, Garrett was taken into custody and faced serious charges. He went to trial and received the harshest punishment possible. His sentence was set to be carried out on January 6, 1992, but a request for mercy from Pope John Paul II led the governor to grant a temporary delay, changing everything. Despite being given a chance to appeal for a reduced sentence of life in prison, the original punishment remained. But could a troubled past have played a role in this shocking outcome? Dr. Dorothy Otno-Lewis later examined Garrett and concluded that he had developed multiple personalities due to the trauma he experienced during childhood. Ultimately, his sentence was carried out on February 11, 1992, at the age of 28, at the Huntsville Unit in Texas. Garrett was given the chance to choose his final meal. He asked for strawberry and chocolate ice cream. When it was time to share his last words, he simply said, "I would like to thank my family for loving me and taking care of me. The rest of the world can kiss my ever-loving ass." His time of death was officially recorded at 6:10 p.m. But did Garrett's troubled past and mysterious behavior leave a deeper question? Now, meet another 17-year-old Napoleon Beasley. On April 19, 1994, he and his friends, Cedric and Donald Coleman, came up with a plan to steal a Mercedes-Benz. But what started as a simple theft quickly turned into something much worse. 63-year-old businessman John Luttig had no idea he was being watched as he pulled into his garage that night. The moment he stepped out, Beasley rushed toward him and fired a shot, leaving him fatally wounded. But it didn't stop there. Luttig's wife was next. She barely survived by pretending to be lifeless until the attackers were gone. The 3 fled in the stolen car, but they didn't get far. Beasley was arrested soon after, and the Coleman brothers testified against him in exchange for 40-year prison sentences. But Beasley faced something far worse. On October 28, 1994, he was sentenced to the most extreme punishment. He fought the decision for years, filing appeals, but every request was rejected. As his final day approached, he was given the option to request a last meal. But instead of asking for something special, he chose nothing at all. On May 28, 2002, he rested for a while before being taken to the last place he ever saw in Huntsville, Texas. When asked if he had any last words, Beasley spoke calmly but with deep regret. "What I did was not just terrible, it was senseless. But the person who did that is no longer here, I am. I'm sorry for what's happening tonight, not just for me, but for everyone involved. I'm disappointed that a system meant to bring justice can sometimes make the same mistakes it tries to fix." At exactly 6:17 p.m., it was over. But what happens when stealing becomes more than just a bad habit? When 17-year-old J. Kelly Pinkerton broke into Sarah Dawn Lawrence's home in Amarillo, Texas, he had planned to steal from her. But what started as a simple break-in quickly turned violent. Sarah was left badly hurt, and things were about to get even darker. In 1980, just a year later, Pinkerton was linked to another tragic incident involving 25-year-old Cher Welch, who worked at a furniture store. What drove them to commit these horrible actions? By 1981, Pinkerton was arrested, and after a deep investigation it became clear he was responsible for both incidents. In separate trials, he was found guilty and received the highest legal punishment at the time. Despite his efforts to appeal the decision for nearly 7 years, each attempt was denied. His sentence was set for 1986, with his final meal choice given the day before: 2 cheeseburgers with fries, onions, lettuce, tomatoes, pickles, ketchup, mustard, and mayonnaise, and a cola. On May 15, 1986, Pinkerton faced his final moments at the Walls unit in Huntsville, Texas. His father, Gene Pinkerton, was the only family member there, watching in silence. When asked if he had any last words, Pinkerton said, "Be strong for me. I want you to know that I'm at peace with myself and with my God. I talked to everyone on the phone. I got to talk to Mom. Tell Mom goodbye and keep your spirits up for me." He then recited a prayer, saying, "I bear witness to Allah. I ask for your forgiveness." His last words were, "I feel dizzy, I feel dizzy." At 12:25 a.m., he was declared unresponsive. Now, if you are shocked, stay tuned, because the final case on this list is even more sinister. This is Sean Sellers, who took the lives of his mother, Vonda Bellotto, and his stepfather, Lee Bellotto, on March 5, 1986, while they were asleep in their Oklahoma City home. To avoid leaving any evidence on his clothes, he wore only his underwear. Afterward, he tried to make it look like a burglary had taken place. Later on, he admitted to being responsible for the 1985 incident involving Robert Paul Bauer, a 32-year-old employee at a Circle K convenience store, after an argument over a beer sale. At his trial, Sellers claimed that he had been involved in Satanism and believed he was under the influence of a dark presence he called Ezurate. His defense team also argued that he had an unusual fascination with the game Dungeons and Dragons, though Sellers himself denied that the game had anything to do with what happened. The jury didn't accept his claims and found him guilty of first-degree homicide in 1986. At the time, Oklahoma law didn't allow for a life sentence without the possibility of parole, so Sellers was given the most severe punishment while in prison. Sellers later converted to Christianity and started making appearances on television shows like The Oprah Winfrey Show and Geraldo, as well as in documentaries about dark cults and criminal cases. During his appeals in 1999, he claimed to have dissociative identity disorder, but the court ruled that his diagnosis came too late to be considered as a valid argument for his appeal. The U.S. Supreme Court chose not to revisit his case as his final days approached. Various organizations and public figures, including the European Union, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and Bianca Jagger, spoke out against the decision, arguing that his age at the time of the incident and his reported rehabilitation should have been taken into account. The day before his scheduled punishment, Sellers was given the option to choose a final meal. He went with Chinese food: spring rolls, sweet and sour shrimp, and fried shrimp. On February 4, 1999, at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary, the sentence was carried out at 12:17 a.m. 5 minutes after the procedure began, he was officially declared no longer alive. When asked if he had any final words, Sellers turned to his step-siblings and said, "For those of you who are here because you hate me and are waiting to see this happen, when you wake up tomorrow, you won't feel any different. You'll still carry the same feelings you have right now, but if you turn to God, He'll be there for you. He can heal you if you let Him. Don't hold on to hate for the rest of your lives. I love you all." He then began singing Christian hymns, and just before the procedure started, he said, "Here I go, Father. I'm coming home. Let's do this, Gary. Let's get started." His final words were part of a song: "Release my spirit so I can praise you. Release my spirit so I can worship you."